Hello and welcome. Today's lecture will be focusing on art of the Aztecs, also known to themselves as the Mexica. So just to get this out of the way very early on, I will probably be using these terms interchangeably, but when I'm talking about Mexica art, I am talking about Aztec art, and we'll jump into the technicalities of those names shortly, but just know that the Mexica and the Aztec, I will be using those terms probably interchangeably during this lecture. Today we'll be taking a look at architecture and urban planning of the Mexica or Aztec. We'll mostly focus on Tenochtitlan, which is their capital city. We'll also go up to Malinalco and check out one of their military retreats as well. We'll focus on sculpture, ceramics, decorative arts, stylistic qualities of Aztec art. We'll talk a lot about the integration of religion, war, and sacrifice in art. And then we'll close this lecture with a look at Spanish invasion and post-contact art, and a look at codices and manuscripts, because the Mexica, like the Maya, did practice writing. They created their own versions of books that are illustrated and can be read today. Alrighty, so the Mexica migrated through Mexico in search of land to settle. The word, or the way that we get the word Aztecs, is because this particular group of people is from a legendary homeland known as Aztlan, which is somewhere to the north. So historians aren't quite sure if this just means north of central Mexico, or if perhaps this means like the southwest of the United States. The language, the Uteco-Aztec languages are related to some of the indigenous people of kind of the southwest United States. So it is possible that they came from perhaps as far north as like modern day Utah, but we're not sure. We do know that they migrated here into the Mexican basin from somewhere up north. So the word Aztec, again, was ascribed to these people later on by historians, but they call themselves the Mexica, and that is where we get the word Mexico actually from. So Aztec refers to Aztlan, their legendary homeland. This very powerful, extremely powerful group of people flourished in the Mexican basin between about 1325 and 1521 CE, so in the Common Era. At its height, their empire stretched from the Valley of Mexico all the way to Guatemala. They extended their control from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. Eventually, they surrendered to Hernan Cortez's Spanish army. And the Spanish army, most historians think that the Spaniards could have not conquered the Aztecs were it not for their alignment with other indigenous groups, including the Tlaxcala. The Aztecs had a habit of going to war and capturing people from their neighbors to use as human sacrifice. So as you can imagine, the Tlaxcalans were probably eager to join forces with the Spaniards in order to crush their oppressors. And Tenochtitlan is this main city that we'll be focusing on today. It was their capital, and it is presently buried underneath Mexico City. So a little bit understanding about them. They followed their leader, Huitzilopochtli, which is a solar deity. He's also a god of warfare. He foretold that his people would settle where they saw an eagle on a cactus with a snake in its beak. If that sounds familiar, it's because that is at the center of the Mexican flag today. So after a long journey, the Aztecs arrived at a lake called Lake Texcoco in the middle of the Highland Basin right here in Mexico. In the middle of that lake, they found an island, and on the island, they found that prophetic scene of the eagle eating a snake on a cactus. So the Aztecs ended up building a really, really impressive home city in the middle of Lake Texcoco. They built it up using pylons and manipulating the water there to build on top of it. And so they ended up building this highly skilled, highly engineered city, kind of basically on a man-made island, because the island wasn't very big and they kept having to expand. So eventually their city had these moats, these causeways. It was very highly defensible. They had engineering projects to bring fresh water into the city, and engineered pylons to make sure that their temples and their structures wouldn't sink into the mushy lake bed. And yes, if you are thinking that the eagle with a snake in its mouth on a cactus is familiar, it is on the Mexican flag today. And this is an illustration of Huitzilopochtli. Huitzilopochtli is a uniquely Aztec deity. He is a solar deity. He is also associated with warfare. He's kind of their cultural hero, and he led the people down south to their capital city of Tenochtitlan. Huitzilopochtli is oftentimes associated with hummingbird imagery, which some of you might think, why would a god of war and the sun associate himself with hummingbirds? Well, I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever had a hummingbird feeder and you've watched hummingbirds, they're very fierce, they're very fast, and they are super territorial. They like to chase each other around. They're also really beautiful and iridescent. But one thing about hummingbirds is they suck the nectar out of flowers much in the same way as the gods would ingest blood from ritual sacrifice. So there are a lot of associations between hummingbirds and fierce warriors in Mesoamerica, and also we'll see this a little bit later in the Andes as well in South America. So this is an illustration from the Codex Borbonicus showing Huitzilopochtli with his hummingbird headdress. This is created on amate paper, which is the paper that the Mexica people wrote their codices on. This is another illustration. This is from after contact with the Spaniards, but this shows the legend of the 7 caves from which the Mexica people originally originated from in their origin story. And let's take a look at the map here. So this is an illustration of what Tenochtitlan looked like when the Spanish first encountered it. It was this beautifully very organized city on a grid pattern that was artificially created on Lake Texcoco. It had these causeways, drawbridges that could be drawn up and drawn down, super highly defensible. They also had these really genius ways of almost having floating gardens where they could dig up soil from the lake bed and put it on these floating reeds and create rotating crops pretty easily that would actually kind of float on the surface of the lake. And this shows the extent of the Triple Alliance, also known as the Aztec Empire. They also, I didn't include a slide for this, maybe I should have, but they also would go back to Teotihuacan for ritual purposes. Of course, Teotihuacan saw its decline in about 600 CE, so it was long since not inhabited. But the Aztec people were very inspired by the pyramids that they saw at Teotihuacan, that were so in such large scale that they, you know, considered it the city of the gods. So it was something that the gods had created, and they drew a lot of inspiration from Teotihuacan. All right. So just as far as the timeline goes, the Aztec Empire is definitely in the post-classic era. They do overlap with many of these other cultures, and the end of their empire comes with the kidnapping of their leader by Hernan Cortez, and the eventual defeat at the hands of the Spanish and their indigenous allies. So the first work of art that I'd like to look at with you all is the calendar stone. It's also sometimes called the sunstone, or in Spanish, Piedra del Sol. This is an incredible work of art that was found at Tenochtitlan. And although this does not function as an actual literal calendar, it does have the 20 day glyphs around the outside of it, which do speak to a certain type of cosmic order. The Aztec sunstone, as it's called, depicts the 5 consecutive worlds from the Aztec creation stories. So when we were looking at the Maya world and discussing some of their origin creation stories, we talked a little bit about how they believed in multiple different iterations of creation, where for the Maya, the gods tried to build people out of wood, but that didn't work. And the people turned into monkeys, and they didn't worship the gods very well, so the gods keep trying again until they get it right with the current creation. So we have a little bit of something similar with the Aztec creation myth. And so they call these different phases of creation different suns. So we have the different iterations of the world, and then the current creation is known as the 5th sun, which is in the center right here. This is an absolutely huge monolith. It is carved out of a huge piece of rock, and it is over 11 feet wide. It is at the Museo Nacional de Antropología in Mexico today. And it is probably the most famous Mexican sculpture. It's been reproduced all around the world since its rediscovery in 1790, where it was found buried face down. So let's talk a little bit about what the iconography is on this sunstone. So at the center of the stone, we have a representation that's either the sun god, or it is the earth monster, Tlahtlicutli. I think it's probably the earth monster, Tlahtlicutli, because it has a obsidian dagger blade for its tongue, and we do see that in images of Tlahtlicutli. It also makes sense for it to be Tlahtlicutli because we have the different iterations of the world and how the world ended in the previous suns in these other illustrations. So up here we have the glyph for wind. One of the previous suns, the earth was destroyed by wind. We also have a jaguar glyph. This represents the era in which jaguars prowled the earth and ended up destroying humans via jaguars. We also have at the bottom left the glyph for rain, where the rain and lightning coming from the sky destroyed the world. And then after that, the next creation, we have down here the water, where the earth was destroyed by a flood. And now in the center, we are currently living in the era of the 5th sun, so the 5th iteration of creation. And this iteration of creation was predicted to end in a series of earthquakes. So I do think that it makes sense for this central glyph to be Tlalocuhtli, the earth monster, who is going to eventually destroy this version of creation. That being said, sometimes it is also interpreted as being the sun god, but I digress. We also have like sun rays coming out of it, which kind of let us think about the solar aspects of this fifth sun that we're living under. I'm attaching on Canvas this video by Smart History that jumps a little bit into this content as well. So I will let you watch that. If you want to pause this video and watch that, go ahead. So the solar diadem again refers to the sun, as does the era that we're living in, which is the fifth sun. This central glyph represents the Aztec glyph for Nahui Oyin, which represents the cyclical movement of nature with respect to the four directions. So this makes sense with the four suns or four creations that became before this one. It also talks about the movement of time. So similar to the Maya worldview, the Aztecs also believed that in order for time to keep moving and for things to keep moving in with cosmic order, that the gods needed to be worshipped and fed and sacrificed to. And that perhaps if you stopped doing this, time would not keep moving in its proper cyclical movements. This is an image of another Aztec depiction of Tlalocuhtli. This is the earth monster. So I wanted to compare what we see with the earth monster in this representation and the representation at the middle of the calendar stone or the sunstone. We have this knife blade coming out of the mouth. Tlalocuhtli is a very interesting deity. Tlalocuhtli can be shown as either male or female. In this large representation of Tlalocuhtli, Tlalocuhtli is being shown as female in a birthing position, but Tlalocuhtli can also be depicted as male because the gods can do that for sure. This is the bigger image of Tlalocuhtli with these massive claws, these earth ear spools, this kind of scary looking mouth that is almost skeletal in that it has no lips. You just see all the teeth, which we again see in the calendar stone. And then this version of Tlalocuhtli, we have breasts. We also have what could be depicted as like a, how do you say that? Postpartum kind of stomach happening here, as if they've just given birth. So I think this is probably the earth god, but some interpretations might tell you that this is a solar deity. After the calendar stone was rediscovered in 1790, it was placed on the outside of the cathedral here in Mexico City, and it drew a lot of attention, a lot of visitors, and it also kind of rekindled an interest in indigenous roots, in traditional Aztec cosmology, and Mesoamerican studies. So it was pretty exciting. As we'll talk about at the end of the lecture, the Spanish definitely made a huge effort to erase the culture that was before them in order to establish their new colonial regime, which we unfortunately see, all throughout where we have people conquering other people groups. But this sunstone definitely brought a lot of attention back to the indigenous roots of Mexico and Mexico City. Today you can see it at the National Museum of Anthropology. It is absolutely massive. And it has inspired quite a lot of copies and quite a lot of different iterations. So this is an example from 1893. This one was created by Tiffany and Company, the jewelry company from New York. And they created this to display it at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. It's made out of silver and agate, and it is basically a copy of the calendar stone. This was created about 100 years after the rediscovery of the calendar stone in Mexico City. But of course, if you've ever been to Mexico, or even just paid attention to street art in California, you've probably seen images of this sunstone, whether it's in murals, wall art, whether it's on money or on t-shirts. You can't go anywhere in Mexico without seeing some version of this sunstone on a t-shirt, on a keychain, on a tote bag. You really do see it everywhere, and it definitely is a part of, it's definitely become a symbol of Mexican identity, Mexican history, for sure. I'll move on to a poem that's included in your book from one of the poet kings, Nezahualcóyotl. He was the king of Texcoco. He was one of the founders of the Triple Alliance that eventually became the Aztec Empire. And he is very famous for being a statesman, an engineer, a philosopher, and also a poet. So this is one of his poems translated into English. He says, I, Nezahualcóyotl, asks this, is it true one really lives on the earth? Not forever on earth, only a little while here. Though it be jade, it shatters. Though it be gold, it is crushed. Though it be quetzal plumage, it is torn asunder. Not forever on earth, only a little while here. So we do have a lot of poetry that has survived from this particular leader. So if you're interested in reading some of his philosophy or poetry, quite a lot of it has been translated into English. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture in the Aztec world. So we'll first take a look at Tenochtitlan, which unfortunately today lies underneath modern day Mexico City. But every year when people are excavating for doing building projects or doing electrical projects, it seems as though new discoveries keep being made. In Mexico, there are laws much like in the United States where if you're going to excavate, you have to allow researchers and archaeologists to come take a look at what you're excavating to make sure that you're not destroying important cultural artifacts. So it is pretty exciting to hear about all the new things that have been discovered in Mexico City, even in just the last few years. So the city of Tenochtitlan was built on an island, the island of Tenochtitlan, in the middle of Lake Texcoco in the 14th century CE. Again, Mexico City is on top of this today, so these are illustrations. It was the ultimate Altepetua, which is that idea of the water mountain, that idea of civilization, that glyph that we see throughout Mesoamerican iconography. It was built on a grid, and the surrounding lake definitely created a defensible buffer. The city was divided into 4 precincts, and the Templo Mayor was the kind of central landmark of the sacred precinct at the center. And again, it's located right in here in the Mexican basin. Here's an illustration from the Codex Mendoza, which shows this city laid out on a grid. Interestingly enough, east is shown at the top here. Oftentimes in Mesoamerican maps, in our maps, we usually put north at the top, but they like to put east at the top. That's where the rising sun comes from. And this one, this is an illustration from the mid-16th century for the Viceroy of New Spain. And the Codex Mendoza is a record of history, tribute, and customs of the Aztecs. And the French King Francis I signed his name up at the top of this. And that's the central motif here is that motif that appears on the Mexican flag. And Tenochtitlan literally means the prickly pear cactus growing on a stone. So that's what they called the island here. It was the capital city of the Aztec Empire. And this one is a picture book of European paper and format. These images were painted by a native artist and then annotated in Spanish. It was probably created for Don Antonio de Mendoza, who was that first viceroy of New Spain, which is what they called Mexico at the time. He was viceroy between 1535 and 1550. And it shows a pictorial history of Aztec emperors and their conquests. But here we see the city that's laid out on a grid. We also see some images of gladiatorial combat and warfare at the bottom. We have this little image up here that looks like a house, and that is probably an illustration of the Templo Mayor. Here's a little bit of a closer look at it. We have individuals with their name glyphs attached to them. We have this image of a skull rack here, which we'll look at in just a moment. But this is an example of a colonial era Aztec book. We also have the glyphs going around the edge as well. This is another map that we have of the city. This one was published in Nuremberg in 1524. This one is a European woodcut, but it was based on indigenous models. So this one kind of shows you a different perspective on depicting the city. This map is obviously very stylized, but the general design does reflect the known layout of Tenochtitlan. And this particular map is oriented with south at the top. And in the center of Tenochtitlan is the ceremonial precinct, which we see right here. And the two towers at the center are the sanctuaries to Tlaloc, the rain deity, and Huitzilopochtli, the solar and war deity, which frame the rising sun above that great temple. Around the ceremonial precinct, we have the royal palaces, more temples, more houses. We have canals and trees, and you can see that it's divided up by roads. The people of Tenochtitlan built up these large causeways or roadways in and out of the city, and they had drawbridges on them, so they were easy to keep in and out, whoever they wanted to keep in and out. Also, to prevent flooding, they created these massive walls that were created from, I think they were over 12 foot thick, these massive walls to help keep the spring-fed part of the lake from flooding into the city under heavy rains. One interesting thing about Lake Texcoco is that it didn't have natural rivers sourcing out of it, so flooding could be a major problem for this city. And they did create really highly advanced engineering to prevent this lake from flooding. They also had aqueducts that brought, here up at the top you can see the water here. They had these really advanced systems of bringing fresh water from outside of the lake onto these giant aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city. So this isn't a history of engineering class, but I want you to be aware of all of the civic engineering and planning that went into making this city literally in the middle of a lake. So that's the aqueduct and the central Templo Mayor at the center. We have the skull racks in here. And I just love the approach at perspective, how everything's kind of at different perspectives. This is a map of Lake Texcoco with Tenochtitlan at the left in the Valley of Mexico circa 1519. Of course, this is not what it looks like today, but you can see these islands in the middle with the causeways, and that's what it looked like before. Recent excavations have actually discovered that the skull racks at the center of the Aztec sacred precincts actually were a real thing that was created. They're called the Zompantli, And these are these massive towers created from human skulls that were probably the result of sacrifice. They were mortared together, and the Aztecs did this to appease the gods, of course. Here are some images of researchers discovering these Zompantli. We have a lot of illustrations of them, and for a while before the actual skulls were discovered, which again happened pretty recently. Recently, they discovered a tower that was created out of 650 skulls. Today, we had these illustrations of these skull racks, and at first, scholars weren't really sure what to do with this, if they were understanding these to be the Aztecs' way of trying to intimidate people, or maybe the Spanish trying to make the Aztecs look really ruthless and bad. But we do know that these Zompantli actually did exist, and we do have evidence of them. So this is an illustration of the Templo Mayor, the double pyramid with blood coming down the steps, and the evidence of the sacrifices being put on display. We also have evidence of skull racks from Chichen Itza, but for the most part, we do not see Maya sites doing this. This seems to be a tradition that comes out of central Mexico. So in the mid-16th century, this center of the capital was drawn up for Father Sagun in a manuscript known today as the Primeros Memoriales. Here we have the twin pyramid of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc at the center of the drawing. And then we have the skull rack, and then the eye shape is the ball court, because we did have ball courts at Tenochtitlan as well. And this is a detail of that skull rack. I love how in these colonial manuscripts we have little footprints that show where people are going, which is pretty amazing. And this is a reconstruction model of the sacred precinct of Tenochtitlan. I know your textbook doesn't really have a scale model of what this looks like, but I wanted to show you what this precinct originally looked like. Of course, it can be kind of risky to build large buildings on kind of squishy man-made lakes. As you might know, Venice is kind of sinking underwater right now. And so to prevent these large buildings from sinking, the Aztecs actually built these pylons, so these large structures that they would pack, and they would build like these artificial foundations to make sure that the buildings wouldn't sink into the mushy, like lake bottom foundation that they were working with. So this central double pyramid that we see here in the middle was about 15 stories tall. Originally, it was called the Templo Mayor, or the Great Temple, and it was the most important structure in the center of this large sacred precinct. It was about 1,200 feet on each side and surrounded by a wall covered in snake relief carvings, which is known as the Coatpantli, or the serpent wall. This precinct may have contained as many as 78 different structures, but the Templo Mayor, this double pyramid, was by far the tallest and dominated the city skyline. Again, these people were making pilgrimages to Teotihuacan, so they were very familiar with those large pyramid structures. This pyramid is similar to many of the other Mesoamerican pyramids that we've looked at so far in this class, in that it was built in several different phases. Or later, more recent iterations of the pyramid were built on top of, encasing older pyramids. So the right side of the shrine was dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of rain, and the south side, which we see on the left, was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. Tlaloc was also associated with mountains, and it's possible that the Templo Mayor was conceived of as a literal mountain, which paid homage to the rain god, kind of a man-made imitation of Tlolik's legendary mountain of sustenance. And we do see with this pyramid that has two temples on top of it, we do see this idea of duality, and we do see in Aztec and Mexica cosmology these ideas of duality and two forces working together or opposing forces working together. So you have a rain god in duality with this solar war god. And in the Aztec language, the word for war was actually fire water. So these two opposing forces coming together. And so I think that the Templo Mayor really illustrates this idea of duality that we see throughout their cosmology. We have evidence that the Tlaloc side was covered with blue and white illustrations, whereas the which represent water, and that Huitzilopochtli side was covered in red paint, which represents solar ideas, fire, blood, things like that. And although we don't have a lot of upfront evidence of like the Maya and human sacrifices, we do have a lot of evidence that the Aztecs did perform human sacrifice. Of course, in the Maya culture, nobles would oftentimes cut themselves and cause themselves to bleed as a part of auto-sacrifice. We do definitely have evidence of the Aztecs performing mass, large-scale human sacrifice at this center. They would also present, other sacrifices as well, including animal sacrifice or smashing beautiful art pieces as well. But we do have human sacrifice and heart sacrifice definitely being performed at this site. Here's a slightly zoomed in view of the Templo Mayor. And again, we have the images of Tlaloc's temple on the north side and Huitzilopochtli's temple on the south side. So you've got these two super steep stairways going up, and we'll take a look at some of these sculptures that are associated with this with these temples. This is another reconstruction of what the Templo Mayor may have looked like as well. This little cutaway shows all the different layers, all the different kind of eras and restructuring of these temples. So the Templo Mayor was first constructed in the reign of Itzcoatl, and then approved upon by Montezuma I, who reigned from 1440 to 1469, and then it was enlarged again during the reign of Ahuitzotl, and he is the emperor who really stretched out the Aztec Empire across a huge swath of land. He reigned from 1486 to 1502. And then all of these rulers employed the resources and labor that were given in tribute by neighboring states in order to build more and more impressive monuments than their predecessors. Here again is an image of the Templo Mayor. So it's built in many layers with the two pyramids on top. So almost consistently in a state of renovation and expansion, the Templo Mayor was rebuilt time and time again, hiding within it chambers and caches of offerings, buried sculptures and funerary ashes, and making of it a sacred mountain. So some of the artwork that we'll look at today is from some of these buried caches that were included every time they built upon the temple. So this is a view of what it looks like today from above. The Templo Mayor was actually taken apart by the Spanish, and the volcanic stone used to create it was actually reused and recycled. In art history, we call it spolia, which is when you take apart an old building and build your own new buildings out of it. So a lot of these stones are actually in some of the colonial era buildings in Mexico City today, including the big cathedral there. So when we see this from above, we see all of these layered setbacks, which lie inside the final version of the temple that was destroyed by the Spanish after their invasion in Mexico. And in this view, we have Huitzilopochtli's side closer to us. And then the Coilshaqui stone is at the center. So this is this massive flat stone of a moon goddess that we'll look at here soon. So keep this in mind. She was, her flat monolith was placed at the base of these stairs. And of course, the top of the stairs, sacrifices would occur, and then remains from the sacrifice would be dumped down these super steep stairs, which I'm sure was probably really intimidating to witness. These are what they look like today, these snake balustrades, including these bodies of undulating serpents from the base of the pyramids. Snakes in Mesoamerica are oftentimes associated with renewal and rebirth. So if you've ever seen a snake shed its skin, its skin kind of looks like it's dead, and then the snake sheds it again. So we have this idea of renewal and rebirth imbued in these snake balustrades. Here's what one looks like today. You can see some of these old steps revealed. We also have the altar of the frogs, which has been, in modern times uncovered. Frogs are associated with the underworld. They're associated with the earth. They're also amphibians, so they're associated with being able to travel from the dark, watery underworld into the terrestrial realm where people live. Here are some examples of standard bearers also found at the base of the pyramid. They may also relate to Coilshaqwi's 400 sons, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. Some of the offerings that we found within the temple include this hand carved urn. This one originally contained ashes. This one's from 1325 to 1519. This one was found in one of those offering caches within the Templo Mayor. This is a photo of the same vessel. So it's made out of terracotta, and it's one of several carved urns that were made as offerings within the different layers of the temple, probably used to hold funerary ashes. And here we see this individual wearing an eye mask, this very fancy headdress, necklaces, pectorals, etc. We also see exotic materials in these caches. So if you remember in the map, Tenochtitlan is located pretty centrally in Mexico, but in this example, we see examples of conch shells and coral, which are of course from the ocean. So we know that people were bringing tribute and offerings from coast to coast all the way here to Tenochtitlan. This one included 3 ceramic drums, which we see up at the front, and examples of female maize deities. Maize is also, or corn is also a symbol for death and rebirth, in that a seed has to be buried in the ground, and it has this husk that has to fall out, and then it seems like it's dead, and then it bursts forth in the springtime to create new life. So we do have these ideas of death and rebirth with the corn in Aztec tradition as well. This large vessel is a female maize deity, and this vessel that was found in one of these offering caches in the Templo Mayor was full of small jade beads, and this symbolized the kernels of maize. And on the lid, there's an image of Tlaloc, whose beneficial rain is necessary for the maize to grow. So again, we have this idea of duality being presented in this vessel, where we have the deity of corn, juxtaposed with the deity that is necessary for rain. Both of those are necessary for life. This jadeite mask was found on the Tlaloc side of the temple in one of these offerings. And before you read the slide, don't look at it. I want you to look at this and think, what culture does this remind me of? What very early so-called mother culture could this mask potentially be from? If you said Olmec, you would be right. This is either an original Olmec mask, which was of course from over 1,000 years before the Aztecs, or it could be an Olmec style mask. As we know, the Maya would keep and cache heirloom objects from the Olmec culture, and it seems as though the Aztec are doing this as well. So perhaps this was a piece of tribute goods that were brought to the capital, but we do see a lot of precious goods being placed inside these different layers of the temple as offerings. And so here we have this Olmec mask with that typical kind of jaguar style mouth, downturned mouth that we see in Olmec culture, and that cleft forehead, which is something that jaguars have. So again, this is an Olmec style mask, potentially an original Olmec mask. And this monolith, which was found at the base of the steps of the Templo Mayor, is this huge circular monolith, which shows the goddess Coilshaqui, who was killed every month by the sun, shown here with her decapitated head and dismembered body. She's made out of volcanic stone, approximately 3 meters across, so more than 12 feet, or 3 meters, so that's like 10 feet across. And this one today is at the Templo Mayor Museum in Mexico. So this one relates to an important myth. This relates to the birth of the Mexica patron deity, Huitzilopochtli. He's the one who guided the people to Tenochtitlan. So in this story, Huitzilopochtli's mother, Coatlicue, let me pull up a photo of Coatlicue for you. So this is Coatlicue. Her name means snakes her skirt. So if you see a goddess with a snake skirt that's made out of woven snakes, I think this would make a really cool looking skirt, just saying. So she is the mother of Huitzilopochtli, but the way that she gets pregnant is kind of mysterious. She finds this ball of really beautiful white feathers, and so she puts it in her clothing and keeps going home. Then she magically becomes pregnant, and her children, she has 400 sons, and then her daughter, Coilshaqui, they discover that their mother is pregnant, and they think that it's really scandalous, and that she's probably committed adultery, even though she hadn't. And so her 400 sons, and her daughter, Coilshaqui, tried to kill her as like an honor killing. However, as they are attacking her, Huitzilopochtli, the hero deity, the war and solar deity of the Aztec, is like majestically comes forth and is fully grown and defends his mother against her 400 sons and her daughter Coilshaqui. And so he ends up chopping Coilshaqui up into many, many pieces. And then she eventually throws her body down the mountain and her body breaks apart. So if we think about the Templo Mayor as a sacred mountain, and the top of the Templo Mayor is where these ritual sacrifices would happen, they are essentially recreating the death of Coilshaqui, and Huitzilopochtli defending his mother and throwing her body down the sacred mountain where it's breaking up into a bunch of different pieces. So this Coilshaqui monolith would have been on the ground at the base of these stairs, so they would reenact that every time they sacrificed and threw the dismembered pieces of sacrificed humans and animals down this mountain. So that is the story of Coilshacqui. When we're looking at this monolith, we can see these little serrated edges. So these little serrated edges show us in Aztec art where somebody is missing a limb. We can also see the articulated joints sticking out. We see that some of her joints are personified as little skulls. We see she's wearing this incredible headdress. Coilshacqui means bells her cheeks, so she's got these little bells on her cheeks. And we see that she's also a mother, and she's got these really intricate outfits. She's also wearing snakes as a belt. So there's a lot going on in this image of Coilshacqui. She's also, in some versions of the story, her body parts get thrown up into the sky and she becomes the moon. And then the 400 sons who come to attack the mother, Coatlicue, get thrown up into the sky and become the stars. So these sacrifices are a part of the order of the moon moving in the sky, the stars moving in the sky, which is how ancient peoples would tell time. Anyhow, this is an image of what this stone looked like with its original polychrome. Again, most of these works of art and architecture were originally brightly painted. This is the possible original colors that we see here. One of the rituals that would be performed at the Templo Mayor would celebrate Huitzilopochtli's triumph over Coilshacqui and the 400, his 400 brothers. And so people would offer gifts to the deity, they would dance, they would eat tamales, and during the ritual, captives from war campaigns would be painted blue and killed on the sacrificial stone, and their bodies would roll down and land on the Coilshacqui stone. At the top center of the Tlaloc side of the temple is a sculpture of a male figure kind of leaning back, reclining like this. You should know what these are called by now. These are called chakmuls. The figure holds a vessel on his abdomen, which was likely there to receive offerings. And this type of sculpture is older than the Mexica, and it's associated with the rain god Tlaloc. And we do see this in central Mexican art that predates the Aztecs. This is an edited photo to show you what this looked like, which with its original polychrome paint. All right, so I mentioned that we were looking at models and illustrations of the Templo Mayor for the most part because the top layers of it were taken apart to create Mexico City. The Spaniards really wanted to kind of erase the Aztec past there and kind of reestablish their own rule. So, they were like, we're going to take your temple and use it to build our own city. We're going to take pieces of your temple and build a church with it. So we kind of have to go outside of Tenochtitlan to find examples of Aztec architecture that have not been dismembered to create other things. So one of those places is Malinalco. This is what Malinalco looks like today. Parts of it are cut from the living rock. Other parts of it are built in stone. It's in these beautiful hills overlooking valleys. And it is one of the few examples we have of Aztec architecture that was not intentionally destroyed by the Spanish. This is what it looks like from the air today. This is what it looks like walking through the streets today. And Malinalco was a retreat for the Mexica military orders. It was also a place for rituals to take place in these different kind of orders of warriors that the Aztecs would train and keep. And the most important building in Malinalco is this temple that's actually cut out of the living rock. So it has these impossibly steep stairs going up into it. Of course, this thatched roof is modern. But let's take a look at what the interior of this temple looks like. So we're going to be looking right over here in the sacred precinct. So the entrance to this doorway is conceived of kind of like a monster jaw going into it. So there's actually like a piece that looks kind of like a tongue, but on the inside we have these eagles and jaguars cut into the rock, and we have these different orders of warriors in Aztec culture, warrior military orders of the jaguar and the eagle knights, and that's what we have going on in here. So certainly this would have been a place for elite military individuals where they would, perform rituals in this almost womb-like space. So we've got the jaguar here, and the eagles here, and this central area cut out of the living rock. This is the entrance to Malinalco, where we see these terrifying monster jaws, and again, you kind of walk into it and it looks kind of like a tongue. You're kind of going directly into the heart of the earth here. And here's some different images of the ceremonial center at Malinalco. All right, let's talk about some of the stylistic qualities of Mexica or Aztec art. So some of the major themes that we see in Aztec art are religion. We see a lot of depictions of their deities. We see a lot of works of art that relate to conveying the sense of cosmic order, sacrifice that helps maintain cosmic order in the universe. We do see works of art that were used as practical receptacles or altars for sacrifice. We see works of art that relate to ritualized warfare. We see themes of death and rebirth, like with maize and with snakes. And we also see quite a bit of political propaganda. So the Aztec Empire definitely ruled with an iron fist. They did perform human sacrifice, and many of their works of art and architecture were meant to assert their power and remind people of their dominance. So we'll look at some altars and some works of art outside of architecture that relate to that political propaganda. We also notice typically in Aztec art, we have slightly geometric, slightly blockier figures than those really kind of elegantly elongated figures that we see in Maya art. We see an emphasis on identity over naturalism. This is something that we saw at Teotihuacan, where we see headdresses and labels that really, emphasize somebody's position and power and their identity over like trying to have a supernaturalistic portrait of the person. We see the use of stone for very large works of sculpture and architecture. We see polychrome paint, incorporation of human skulls in some cases, whether that's for large works of intimidating architecture or decorative pieces. We do see some use of human skulls and bones. And we, of course, see the use of precious stones like jade, turquoise, and also gold. Unfortunately, a lot of our Aztec gold has been melted down by the Spaniards because the Spaniards really liked gold and liked to repurpose it. So for sculpture, we'll start out by looking at some sculpture. We see many works of monumental sculpture, so very large sculptures found in Tenochtitlan. We see devotional objects, ritual offerings, sculpture used for receiving sacrificial offerings. Of course, more of those political and religious themes as well. So this is a depiction of Coatlicue. That means snakes her skirts. This is the mother goddess of Huitzilopochtli. And this one is 8'6". So this is a very large blocky statue. It may have been inspired a bit by the moon goddess statue that we saw at Teotihuacan. This one consists of a female form. She's draped with a blouse, and this blouse is made from severed human hands and hearts. Hearts were seen as these living jewels, and in Aztec human sacrifice. The whole point was to pull the heart out when it's still beating. She's wearing a skirt out of intertwined serpents, which is where she gets her name. Snake's her skirt. And she has rattlesnakes for hands. The head is composed of two giant rattlesnake heads facing one another, which sometimes in Mesoamerican art, and we see this in Aztec art as well, the snakes coming out of somebody's body where their head should be can represent that they've been beheaded, and those are like spurts of blood coming out, personified blood. We saw this. We've seen examples of this already as well at the ball courts. And she has a skull as her belt buckle, and her feet are jaguar claws. And we have this serpent of blood that comes between her legs, which may be a reference to menstruation, but it's also kind of phallic looking as well. So we do see a lot of kind of, sometimes gods in Aztec art have sort of duality of gender in their personified bodies. And here's a slightly different photo, but it's the same image. This one was rediscovered in the 18th century, and it was so fearsome that it was reburied for some years. Here we have an example of a sandstone sculpture that was buried when the Aztec invaded the city of Tehuacan in Puebla. And this example that was rediscovered in 1849 shows a sculpture that embodies several Aztec deities, including Mictlantecutli and Xochipilli. And we have 3 calendar glyphs running down the spine. So oftentimes when we see Aztec deities, they can take on different aspects of different gods and goddesses. We see this in Hinduism. We even see this in Christianity as well, when we have, God and the Trinity being kind of shown and personified as different aspects. So we do see that a lot in Aztec art, gods and goddesses taking on kind of the duality of different forms. These are paired figures that are also from Puebla. The skeletal female figure in the snake skirt is Coatlicue, the snake's her skirt, the mother of Huitzilopochtli. And the other male figure might be Huitzilopochtli, but he doesn't have a lot of really distinguishing markers. And they also have date glyphs on the back of their heads, 8 grass and 4 crocodile, which may have had some sort of local significance. And here's one photo of just Coatlicue. And she has her signature snake skirt and talon feet. She also has a small skull hanging from her neck and inlaid turquoise tears on her cheeks, which is pretty cool. It's like the precursor of the facial tattoos, maybe. She may have also worn an elaborate headdress. Oftentimes in art history, if you see a sculpture that has like a bald head with areas like holes in it for mounting something, usually that means they were originally wearing some sort of large headdress. This stone is called the Stone of Tizoc. It commemorates the brief reign of a minor 15th century ruler. Here on the sides, we have images of warriors holding captives by their hair. In the top, we have a solar disc similar to what we saw in the calendar stone. And in the upper surface, we also have Tizoc himself wearing a large headdress at the center of the image. So this is a cylindrical stone. It measures 8.5 feet in diameter, more than 3 feet high. So it's very monumental. And let's take a look at one of these details. So this is a detail of the Stone of Tizoc. So we have a warrior holding a captive by their hair. We see that the warrior is wearing probably some quetzal feathers in their headdress, massive ear spools, and just really elaborate regalia. One of the interpretations is that the sunstone was actually used as a temelkata, which is a gladiatorial platform. These were large stone structures in which a sacrificial victim would be tied and then forced to fight until they were eventually killed, to placate the dreaded Tenayet. There are several examples of these stones in Mexican ruins, so it's possible that this could have been one of these gladiatorial stones. So this warrior would fight to the death as a sacrifice in the middle of this stone. And here are some illustrations of that type of gladiatorial combat, which, of course, you know, when you study other cultures like the Romans, they have their own version of gladiatorial combat, and we also see this with the Aztecs. In keeping with some of the themes that we were talking about, depictions of deities and deity impersonation is a really big thing in Aztec culture. We also saw this in Maya culture as well, in the Bonampak murals when we have the procession of people dressed as earth deities. So ritual god impersonation is definitely something that we see in Mesoamerican art and culture. And so some of these statues might represent the gods themselves, but some of them may represent deity impersonators. On the left, we have an image of Xipe Totec from the Codex Borbonicus, and his name means our Lord, the Flayed One, and so he is oftentimes showed wearing flayed skin with his exposed kind of red skin, muscle underneath. And so a ritual that the Aztecs would do to impersonate Xipe Totec, a priest or a person would wear the skin of a flayed victim for 20 days, which sounds terrifying. But yes, they would wear the skin for a 20-day ritual, and over 20 days it would rot away, much like the husk of a seed. So in this image, and this one's similar, it's not quite the same one, but we have the Xipe Totec impersonator wearing a victim's skin, and it's tied. You can also see the dangling hands that they're, that's what's happening there. All right, also discovered in hundreds of pieces in 1996, this large ceramic devotional image, which is 3 foot 6 inches tall, shows Chichomecoatl, who's the goddess of maize, and she holds the ripe ears of grain, and she was part of a matching set of fertility deities that were probably all made in the same workshop. So we have this huge example of one of these Aztec female maize deities. Here we have another example of a chacmul, these reclining male figures that hold a platform for receiving offerings. This one's wearing a Tlaloc mask. So Tlaloc is a deity that we've seen. We even see references to Tlaloc as far back as Teotihuacan. We do know that the Aztecs would pilgrimage to Teotihuacan and venerate aspects of their culture. And so we see that they definitely integrate the worship of Tlaloc into their pantheon of gods and goddesses. And this one is worked with aquatic motifs on the underside. So yes, this is a reference to Tlaloc, this god who had been venerated long before the Aztecs arrived to this area in the Mexican basin. This is another example of a work of art created as a receptacle for sacrifice, and this one was used to collect human entrails after sacrifice. Here we have a commemorative monument representing the Temple of Sacred War. This one is from 1507. This one is meant to look like the Temple of Sacred War, but it was probably actually used as a throne. So when the ruler would sit on the throne, they would have the sun or the solar disk at their back. So it would be like they were responsible for initiating the sacrifices, initiating the wars that were keeping the sun rising every day, because that is the reason why these people were performing sacrifices, was to reenact what the gods had done to set the world in motion. We have some date glyphs on the front as well. And here's a detail of that solar glyph at the back, with that glyph meaning to keep the time turning and relating to the cycles of time on the back. We also have examples of life-size eagle warriors. This is from the House of the Eagles. This is fired stucco and clay with pigment. So we've been looking at a lot of stone carved objects. This one is a huge ceramic sculpture. And if anybody has ever worked with ceramics, you know it's really difficult to make large ceramics because they can easily collapse on themselves. They're also really difficult to move around and fire. So the fact that we have a set of these eagle warrior sculptures is pretty impressive. Here's one of the others from this collection. So this is an idealized young eagle warrior who is poised as if to take flight. These ones are made by Gulf Coast sculptors. Of course, the Aztec Empire did stretch out to the Gulf Coast during their height. It came to Tenochtitlan as the empire grew. So I mentioned when we were looking at the map that the engineers and leaders of Tenochtitlan built this incredible aqueduct system that brought fresh water from outside of the lake and transported it into the island in the middle of the lake where the city was. And so this very large red carneliite grasshopper, which is over a foot long, probably refers to Chapultepec, which means Hill of the Grasshopper. It was just west of Tenochtitlan, and it was the source of the capital's fresh water. The emperor also, or the king also had botanical gardens and like a pleasure palace there. It was really, really beautiful. If you're interested in hydrology or engineering, this might be a cool thing to research for your research project. And yeah, this may have been carved specifically as an offering to the gods, or it may be a reference to that place of fresh spring water that brought life into the city. Here we have this beautiful two-headed serpent sculpture. It was perhaps worn as a pectoral or on the chest, and this one was probably created between 1400 and 1520. It's wood with turquoise shell covering it. Today it's at the British Museum, but it's this just beautifully incredible work of art, probably wearable art as well. Check out those teeth. We have this, again, this idea of duality, and then probably ideas of rebirth and renewal with these snake icons. So we've talked a little bit about the human sacrifice that the Aztecs performed. They also performed animal sacrifice as well. This is another example of one of these offering caches found at the Templo Mayor. This case, we have 21 pieces of hammered gold. So a lot of the Aztec gold that we do have today has been discovered, you know, in buried caches, so it avoided being melted down by the Spaniards. And these works of hammered gold were designed to create a sacrificial attire for a sacrificed young wolf. So we do know animals were sacrificed here. We have examples of like wolves and eagles and other majestic animals being placed in these caches to honor the gods. All right, well, let's move on and talk a little bit about ceramics. So the Mexica created their own ceramics. They also imported fine ceramics from their vast empire. And the first one that we'll look at is from the Mixteca Puebla. And this one served the nobility in very honorable locations. So this elegant cup comes from Tomb 7 at Monte Alban. But the artist perched this little bird at the rim of the cup. They painted it with post-fire Maya blue pigment. So we do have examples of this style of ceramics being imported into the Aztec capital as well. This is an urn with the god Tlaloc on it. You guys might be familiar, the goggle-eyed god that we see in Mesoamerican art is typically related to Tlaloc, the rain deity. This one is found at Tenochtitlan in Tomb 21, and it's this beautiful Maya blue color. and this intricate kind of masked face carved out of this vessel. We also have some examples of ceramic shapes that were used as stamps. So it's possible that these stamps that we see were used for stamping designs on human skin, or perhaps for decorating cloth. This one is in the shape of a monkey. So if anybody needs some tattoo ideas, these probably were originally used as body art. They are not very big. This one's like less than 2 inches. And we also have this example that's a bird. These kind of remind me of the Nazca lines a little bit. We'll look at that when we look at the art of the Andes in South America. This one's, again, pretty small. This one's a little bit bigger, a little bit more than 2 inches. But these stamps were used for attaching designs. All right, let's take a look at some of the luxury good items created by the Aztecs. We know that they love to work in luxury materials, including jade, feathers, and gold. Many of these different materials would have been sourced from across their vast empire, so that they would have to go to the jungles for quetzal feathers. Turquoise could have been sourced from as far north as the American Southwest. And we also have some works that even include human skulls. Here we have, this one is actually, of course, a post-Spanish invasion work of art, but we do know that feather mosaic and feather working was an incredibly labor-intensive luxury manufacturing process that the Aztecs used. Some of the examples that we have that have survived into the modern era are, of course, from the colonial period. Here we have an example of the Mass of St. Gregory. So we have a Christian image here. But all of these iridescent feathers or iridescent blue backgrounds that we're seeing are actual feathers. So this one is based on a European print. And this feather mosaic represents the melding of indigenous and European artistic traditions. Here we have these colorful iridescent feathers with a gold sheet. And it shows the 6th century Pope Gregory consecrating the Eucharist. Here we have Christ's body miraculously appearing behind the altar. And the inscription details that Friar Pedro de Gante and Don Diego Huantitzin, who was Mexico's governor at the time, commissioned the work as a gift to Pope Paul III, whose 1537 papal decree defended the rights of indigenous people. So this was kind of a thank you for him advocating for the rights of indigenous people in the Catholic world. This is an example from the Florentine Codex, which shows individuals working with these feathers and making these incredibly complicated feather designs. Here we have one showing people making a feathered headdress. They would go through all sorts of different processes in these feather mosaics. And one particular example of one of the few surviving original Aztec headdresses, this one's called the headdress of Montezuma. They're referring to Montezuma II. Here, we're not sure if this is his actual headdress, but this is one of the very few examples of these quetzal feather headdresses that has survived without, accidentally being burned or purposefully being destroyed. This one is at the Weltmuseum in Vienna. And here is a detail of it. You can just see all of these different colored feathers being utilized in this almost mosaic way. Also with these hammered pieces of, I believe this is gold as well. We do have some examples of Aztec artists using human skulls as their canvases. This skull is probably a depiction of Tenochtitlan, who is a creator deity in the Aztec world from the 15th or 16th century. This is a human skull with turquoise and shell in here, and it's got these wide eyes. The jaw could actually move on this, and it was probably also meant to be worn as part of a god impersonator regalia. So you could I'm trying to think. There are some good examples of like religious impersonators today. Like there are some like a nativity scene. I feel like that could be an example of a modern day God impersonator type thing. You go to church on Christmas Eve and you have people dressed up as like Mary and Joseph and the three wise men. So we definitely have this in Mesoamerican culture where people would kind of take on the identity and dress of a god for ritual purposes. So this one's probably a costume of the deity Tezcatlipoca. This god is shown with these um, block striped bands on his face, and this is an example of Tezcatlipoca from the Codex Borgia. Pretty impressive. All right, let's talk a little bit about Mexica, or yeah, Mexica codices and manuscripts. So oftentimes these works of literature are referred to as codices. This is a Western term for books that are bound on one side, kind of like this book. Most of the books that we use are bound on one side. This is a tradition that comes out of Egypt. However, most of the books that were created by the Aztecs were technically screenfold, so they're more like accordion books where you can open them up. You can like open up the whole book and then they fold back together, kind of like a map maybe would today. And this means that they were created from very long sheets of paper that were folded back and forth on itself. Similar to scrolls, they had a specific orientation and were meant to be read in a specific order, but they did not have a spine edge like a modern book that we use in the Western world today. In the course of research, it also appears that some of these documents were bound in a codex format after they arrived at the institutions in Europe that would take ownership of them. There's thought to be at least 500 Aztec codices. However, only about 20 of them survive today that are actually pre-Columbian. And some sources just consider 5 as genuine. And we also have examples of post-colonial manuscripts that include both traditional ways of portraying things or indigenous ways of portraying things, and also European constructs of illustrations and writing as well. So almost immediately after the arrival of the conquistadors, the Aztecs began chronicling their treatment, as well as a lot of the diseases that were brought by the Spaniards. And so we do have some of these that show the indigenous perspective of that arrival. So the Aztecs use a visual language that they use for their written documents, and they used paper made from the bark of fig and mulberry trees called amate for their books, maps, and calendars. And here's an example of what amate paper looks like when you're first creating it, made out of mulberry and fig tree bark. You can actually find works of art still produced on amate paper in different regions in Mesoamerica today. But here's an example of the Codex Selden. So the Codex Selden is a niche-tech manuscript that's made on deerskin. Most of the pages were completed before the Spanish invasion. And for this part of the story, a young woman named Six Monkey is the heroine. And the story reads from bottom to top following these red guidelines. So we've got these lines that show parts of the story. So we would read it like this direction. And in the lowest register, we have a pre-wedding bath. We have a record of the wedding gifts that they received. The third register up, Six Monkey rides in a backpack to visit the enemies who speak with flinty tongues. So let's take a look at what some of this looks like. So if we start down here, we have a detailed record of the wedding gifts that Six Monkey received. And similar to the Maya, a lot of times somebody's name glyph refers to the date that they were born. So you're born on the 6th day of monkey. So the kind of like their version of a month. So here we have offerings brought to Six Monkey and her husband Ten Wind. They brought these to the goddess Nine Grass Death. We have a necklace made out of gold beads over here and hooks. We have a red chili with a heart, and we've got plates of gold. We've got a death serpent right here, so you see this candy skull with a serpent attached to it. We have a complete dress right here and a skirt and a catch cameedle. And then we have some of these other offerings as well. We have the date 10 wind of the year 10 reed, which might refer to a day in the past. Then we have 3 women and 4 men, and another man playing the Teponsatli in the center. And they are participating in a dance right here. So some of these figures are labeled with their names. And oh, I guess this cut off, but this is them taking the bath before their wedding, the Six Monkey and her fiance, Ten Wind. If we move up here, these are some of the center images. We have, and here we have Lady Six Monkey riding in a backpack here. So you can see that her name glyph is attached here. So we have the monkey head with 6 beads attached to it. So this is her name label. So we see Six Monkey here. This is where they approach the enemies who speak to them with flinty tongues. So you can see that their speech scrolls have these little flint knives coming off of them. Up at the top, we see Lady Six Monkey again. So we see the monkey with the 6. It's attached to her. I know we should all start writing our names that way with like our month and our day attached to us. Here she is. She's complaining to a goddess. Anyhow, hopefully this can give you kind of an example of these codices, how they tell stories. They do mix in glyphs with illustrations, but compared to Maya, they do seem to rely a bit more on illustration, compared to Maya glyphs. I love these little footprints that show them walking towards these places. These are the towns called the Hill of the Moon and the Hill of the Bumblebee. And yeah, anyhow, super interesting. I could talk about that for a long time. But we're moving on to detail of page 56 from the Codex Borgia. Here we have Mictlantecuhtli and Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl you should be familiar with. He's the feathered serpent. So we have, again, this duality of these like life-giving gods with these death gods, and they're shown back to back. Halloween couples costume, anyone? And here we have this image that frames one end of a divination cycle, and the 20 days names run along the sides of the page, so you can get familiarized with their versions of glyphs. And they're standing over the open-mouthed earth monster, which we've seen already. And they almost seem to be performing a dance. Anyhow, I think this would make a great couple's Halloween costume. I don't know about you guys. If you want to do that for your research project, you definitely can. And this is folio 1 from the Codex Fehervari Mayer. It's from 1400 to 1521 CE. And this cover page of this pre-Hispanic manuscript presents the concepts of the world order. We have 5 cardinal points or cardinal directions that are associated with colors and birds, and of course northwest, south, east. Here we see the Maltese cross frame of 260 dots. So you can see the 260 dots on this cross frame, and it refers to the 260 days of the Mesoamerican calendar and its completion. So this is, we also have depictions of these world trees, so these trees from which life and crops and goods are coming from. So this is really a illustration of world order and world creation in the form of a calendar. In the center, we have the god Xitekutli, and around this image, we have the strewn body parts of the god Tezcatlipoca, who he just sacrificed, which kind of creates this world order and keeps time moving. So lastly, we'll finish up by looking at some works of art post-contact, post-Spanish invasion. So unfortunately, what happened to the Maya, a lot of the Maya codices does happen with Aztec art as well. So the systematic destruction of culture happens via book burning. Also the dismantling of architecture to build Mexico City. So again, this is a pretty common concept of trying to destroy cultural identity, indigenous religions in order to build a colonial city where people are taking on their new customs from their new rulers. We also see the draining of Lake Texcoco for the building of Mexico City, introduction of Christianity. Although we do see a lot of cultural continuity, this of course is going to be changed with the different ideas and religion brought by the Spanish. And then we do see new colonial identities and art styles which fuse indigenous art practices, beliefs, and cosmologies with European ideas and styles. So we already looked at that a little bit with that gift for the Pope that was created out of feather mosaics. But let's take a look at what this looks like in Aztec art post-contact. So the Dominican Diego Duran completed important histories and ritual books. Here we have a page from his History of the Indies, which shows Montezuma II seated here, directing the carving of his own portrait. And here he's being shown in kind of the way that a Roman emperor would portray themselves. So we do have indigenous artists who are looking at prints and illustrations from Europe and getting inspiration for depicting their leaders and their histories in a format that is more European than what they did prior. Here we have a ritual impersonator of the god Tlaloc. This one's from 1580 to 1620 CE. Here we see the god being shown in contrapposto, but we see him with this traditional kind of goggled mask and this interesting little nose. Here's a chalk nose. Chalk is the Mayan version of Tlaloc. Here we see some chalk masks from the nunnery quadrangle at Uxmal. So we've seen this guy before a lot in Maya and other cultures. And here he's being shown in a very European manner. So he's standing in contrapposto. We also see little shadows coming off of his feet, which is something that we see in European art, that depiction of shadows. And this is what contrapposto is. This is a style that the ancient Greeks came up with to have more naturalistic looking individuals. So instead of standing like really rigid, the ancient Greeks would put kind of a natural sway in the body, which is typically how people stand. Usually people don't stand super evenly with weight on both feet. Usually it's more comfy to shift your weight from one foot or another. So we have this ritual impersonator of Tlaloc standing in that contrapposto, but he is being shown with these traditional regalia of a Tlaloc impersonator. So that ends our look at Aztec art, and this just kind of reviews for some of the concepts that we looked at today. Don't forget to do your readings. Next time we will jump into the next section of our class, but that was the last chapter in your textbook, The Art of Mesoamerica by Mary Ellen Miller, and I will see you next time.